All right, it is noon, so let's go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon. Welcome to our first webinar Tuesday of the year. I hope your year is off to a really great start and your New Year's resolutions and goals, if you set them, are going really well. If becoming better with your money and budgeting is one of your 2024 goals, then you have definitely come to the right place. My name is Allie Smith. I'm an education program specialist here at Penn State's Sokolov-Miller Family Financial and Life Skills Center. I head the one-on-one financial coaching program here at the center, and I also host this regular webinar series. Now that we've kind of kicked off our series for the semester, I'll see you every other week throughout the semester to chat about a new topic this spring. I've also got Nick, and he's already throwing some good stuff in the chat here. He's one of our financial literacy ambassadors at our office, and he'll be moderating the chat today and posting some helpful links and resources in the chat throughout the webinar. So definitely be on the lookout for those extra tidbits of information that'll be coming through the chat. So as you have questions, you can ask them in that chat feature or in the Q&A. Nick and I will both be looking at the chat, and we'll go ahead and check out the Q&A at the end of the webinar. The Q&A feature does allow you to ask questions anonymously if you'd like to take advantage of that. So starting at our next webinar, we will be partnering again with the SMEAL Ethical Leadership Challenge. We unfortunately don't have a QR code to share out today for that, but we will at our next webinar on February 6th, which is all about taxes. So if you're interested in that and think it could be helpful as we approach tax season, definitely get that on your calendar. All right, so with housekeeping kind of out of the way here, today we are talking all about budgeting, and the goal of today's webinar is to empower you to really build a better budget. This is such an important topic because, as you'll see, budgeting is the foundation of financial literacy, and your budget is the foundation of your own financial wellness. So before we really dive in here, I'd love to get to know who all is in our audience. I'm going to share out a poll just to see where you're tuning in from. Or I'm sorry, not where you're tuning in from, but really who you are. Speaking of where you're tuning in from, I saw York Campus joined in our participants. Welcome, York Campus. Glad to have you here. Got a great mix of folks in our audience today. A little bit of everyone, which is so good to see. We've got undergraduate students, graduate students, a good amount of staff and faculty, it looks like, alumni, a couple Penn State parents, and even a community member. So welcome all. We are so glad to have you here. I really hope that you get some value out of today's webinar and walk away being able to create a budget if you don't have one, or if you do have one, being able to improve upon your budget and your budgeting skills. So you already heard me say that your budget is the foundation of your financial wellness. Let's take a closer look at financial wellness and what that really means. So could you let me know in the chat, if you're comfortable, what does financial wellness mean to you? I'll give you a second to warm up those fingers. Not panicking if an unexpected expense occurs. Stability. I agree with both of those. Independence and security. Budgeting. Yes, Heidi, what a great answer. So financial wellness is not determined by your income, your net worth, or your credit score. These factors can definitely play a role, but I will say there are plenty of folks out there who make larger incomes or have great credit scores that are actually struggling financially. So here's what financial wellness is officially from the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. In the present, having financial wellness looks like having control over your day-to-day, month-to-month finances, it also looks like being able to make choices in everyday life that bring you a little bit of joy. So maybe that looks like getting a Starbucks once in a while and not having to worry about it too much. In the future, financial wellness looks like having the capacity to absorb financial shock when an unexpected emergency occurs, just like someone said in the chat, and being on track to meet your financial goals, whatever they may be. So now that we have kind of seen this official definition of financial wellness, can you think of anything that having financial wellness might bring you specifically? And we already got some of these types of answers, but if you can think of anything else, like what would having financial wellness empower me to do? And you're comfortable sharing that in the chat, I would love to see it. Travel, a happy and healthy retirement, making better choices on purchases. Absolutely. Some things that I think about are, I've got kind of three things I think about when I think about, what does having financial wellness empower someone to do? The first thing is just generally having less stress in your life. Money problems are stressful, right? They can consume our mind. And so when we're in this place where we are financially well, there is this part of our brain that's kind of been freed up, right? We've got less stress in our life. The second thing is having the ability to make decisions that serve you and not being tied to something that isn't serving you because of money. So here I think about potentially like toxic relationships or even like toxic job environments where, if you're financially well, you've got your stuff in line, you're empowered to leave those potentially toxic environments, right? Financial wellness gives you that freedom of choice. And then the third thing is just this sense of personal empowerment and independence, which I did see someone mentioned in the chat. Linda says, telling your money where to go rather than wondering where it went. Yes, and that's what we're going to talk about today with budgeting, right? That is what budgeting is all about. So all of these things, the things that you guys have mentioned in the chat, the things on the screen cited by the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, along with what I just noted, these are all good things. And these are things that really I want for everyone. That's why I do this work. And I think arguably these things are important to everyone, no matter if you make $40,000 a year or $200,000 a year. Again, because there are plenty of high income earners who struggle financially because they don't have this foundation of budgeting and understanding kind of where their money is going. So long story short, we all need a budget. And at the center, we approach financial wellness within a ladder framework. So here's what I know to be true about climbing a ladder. Two things. First of all, a stable base is very important when you're climbing a ladder, right? You don't want your ladder to be like falling over because your base is unstable. And then also, you've got to take it one step at a time, right? As you're climbing your ladder, you can't jump right to the top. That probably isn't going to go well. You might fall right off, right? So our financial wellness ladder actually works the same. Our budget is our stable base and our foundation in financial literacy. And from there, we can work on achieving other financial goals like creating our emergency funds, considering or conquering our debts, planning for the future, and ultimately growing our wealth. So at some point in our lives, we probably all want to find ourselves at the fourth or fifth rungs where we're, planning for the future and we're growing our wealth. And of course, this is a journey and it will likely take years to get there or like a lifetime to get there. But it all starts with a budget, right? It all starts with a budget. So today we are going back to the basics and really digging into the nuts and bolts of budgeting. But before we do that, I just want to address what a budget is and what a budget isn't. So a budget is really just a spending plan. When we have and stick to our budgets, we are telling our money where to go rather than wondering where it all went, right? Just like Linda said. Budgeting tends to get a bad rep. A budget is not meant to be super restrictive or to never allow you to spend any of your money on wants. Having a budget doesn't have to mean that we are being cheapskates. The purpose of a budget is to help you achieve your financial goals and spend and save your money how you want to spend and save your money. A budget gives structure to your day-to-day, month-to-month finances, and you really get to choose what this looks like. So ultimately, your budget will tell a story. Let's take a look at Alex's budget to see what story that this tells. So here we've got Alex's budget. His income is on the right here. His income sources total $1,325. So he's got a job, he's got some grants and scholarship income, and his grandma sent him some money, which was very nice of her. And then we've got his expenses on the left. You can take a look through those, and I'll give you a second to kind of digest this, but I would love if you could share in the chat anything that you notice about Alex's budget. He's in debt. Right, yes. What tells you that he's in debt? Because well, I guess I'm seeing some debt here. A car payment, that means he's in debt. Is there anything else that's kind of telling you that he's in debt? Expenses are greater than his income, right? So that probably means that he's using some sort of debt vehicle to spend more money than he's got. And I would assume it's a credit card because I see a credit card payment here in his expenses. It's $35, which that is probably a minimum credit card payment, right? So that's kind of making sense, especially since we see he's spending more than he's bringing in. He's got that minimum credit card payment. He is also dining out a lot, right? $150 is quite a lot for dining out for someone whose budget isn't balancing, right? It also looks like let's see here, he spent $100 on clothes, which I also have to wonder if that was a need or a want. Of course, if he's buying winter clothes, that might be a need, but maybe not. I also find it interesting that he is saving $25 and is giving $40 to charity, even when he's kind of running this deficit. Yeah, very little savings, right? So Alex has a lot going on here with his budget, right? On the surface, he maybe looks okay. He might feel okay. At least he has a budget, right? But as we dig a little bit deeper here, we find out that maybe he's not so okay. So let's explore how we could build a better budget. A good budget is one that is honest, accurate, and complete. And I'll say this a few times throughout the webinar, so we've got to keep this in mind. These are kind of your rules for having a good budget: honest, accurate, and complete. There are many different budgeting methods to choose from. You have to choose the right method for you, and this might take a little bit of trial and error. Remember earlier when I said that your budget is a spending plan? What we're looking at here, are all different types of spending plans. A good budget has got to be two things: a plan for how you want to save and spend your money, and it's also got to be a tool to help you keep track of your spending to help you achieve the plan that you set out for yourself. We'll talk about tools a little bit later in the webinar, but first, here are some options for how you might plan and organize your budget and your money. You might have heard of some of these already, and some of them might be new to you, so let's just kind of go through these. First, there is the cash envelope method. With this method, you divide your available spending money for the month into separate envelopes that represent your spending categories. So think things like food, entertainment, rent, etc. If you take this literally, this method might be a little outdated. I'm not sure how many of us have all of our money in cash or have access to get cash out that regularly. but they can be virtual envelopes, and this approach can be adapted for use with budgeting apps. In the zero-based budget, you allocate every penny that you bring in each month to savings, to debt, to expenses. The budgeting sheet that we have at the center follows this zero-based budgeting method. Then there is the 50-30-20 method, and this is a popular one. In this method, you allocate 50% of your income to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to savings. There is also the pay yourself first method, which could actually be combined with any of the other budgeting methods. Under this method, to put it simply, you just prioritize saving first. So anytime you bring money in, the first thing you'll do is save the portion that you've planned to save. At minimum, at least 10% of your income, ideally maybe 10 to 20% of your income. But the reason that this method is so powerful is that it can be easy to tell ourselves that we're going to save. But then, the end of the month rolls around and we've spent everything and we have nothing left over to save. So if we save first and spend what's left, we're paying ourselves first. And I will say I highly recommend stacking this pay yourself first method with whatever budget you plan to follow. And lastly, we've got the 70-20-10 method. And under this one, you'd allocate 70% of your monthly net income to expenses, 20% to savings, and 10% to debt. So there are lots of options to choose from here. There are more as well. This doesn't cover all of them. One thing I will say, and I think I mentioned this loosely, is that you should be budgeting based off of your net income, not your gross income, because your net income is what you've actually got landing in your bank account each month or each pay period, and that's the money that you've actually got to work with. So all of these plans here are going to kind of be based off of your net income. So I've got a poll for you guys. Which of these budgeting styles do you think might work best for you? Or which would you be willing to try? And you can actually choose multiple. So if you're like, this one might work for me, but I'd be willing to try this one too, you can select multiple. I'm seeing a lot of pay yourself first, which I love. And it looks like the zero-based budget is pretty popular too. Personally, I use the zero-based budget. I like to just allocate everything. Okay, it looks like we've stopped moving around here. So the most popular by far is pay yourself first, and I'm so glad that you're thinking about that. We also are liking the 50-30-20 and the 70-20-10, which I'm not surprised by. I think those are pretty popular ways to kind of plan out and budget your money. And even the cash envelope method got some votes. For folks who have cash on hand, I think that can be a really great way to allocate things out. And of course, like I said, you can kind of adapt that approach for budgeting apps too. So awesome. All right. Moving on here. Great question. Our slides, I believe, are on our website. I should know this, but we do post recordings of our webinars. Like this is being recorded today, and we post the recording on our YouTube page. That'll be up tomorrow on our YouTube page. So if you go on YouTube and find Financial and Life Skills, Penn State, you'll find all of our webinar recordings, and you can rewatch this one. Good question. So before we dig any deeper, I do want to highlight that budgeting should really be a physical activity, not a mental one. So maybe you're someone who currently approaches your finances by just thinking about your money. Maybe you think about how much you got in your paycheck, you think about what you need to pay out in your rent, and then you're left with what you have to spend on food or use to go out with this weekend. That is a good start. I love that you're thinking about your money, but that's not quite budgeting. So it is important that you create a physical budget of some kind. I like to say that journaling for your mental health is kind of similar to budgeting for your financial health. It's all about getting all of that mumbo jumbo out of your head and onto paper or onto some physical form. It can be a big stress reducer and relieve a lot of anxiety around it all. So if you currently have a mental budget or you don't have one at all, it's really this easy. Once you've chosen your budgeting style to try, and again, you might need to try a few different styles. It might take a little bit of trial and error, and that's okay. But once you've got that, you want to set a financial goal. Starting with a goal can be a good motivator to actually complete and follow your budget. So maybe your financial goal is to save for a trip, pay off your credit card balance, or create an emergency fund. From there, you'll find a tool that you'll like. We'll talk about tools in a few minutes. Then you'll identify your income and expenses and subtract your expenses from your income. So this is kind of like tracking your spending. This is something that the tool that you identify can help you do. Then the last step, adjusting your spending as needed, is truly the most important step. If you're just keeping track of your spending and not really doing anything with the data that you gather, you're not really budgeting. And this is exactly what Alex was missing from his budget that we looked at earlier. He had tracked his spending and he might have felt like he had a good budget, but he wasn't adjusting his spending based on the deficit that he had going on. So we need to make sure that we're looking at our budgets regularly and using this information to actually change our habits and adjust our spending. And if this feels like a lot, don't worry, we're going to unpack each of these steps. Starting with setting a goal, and not just any old goal, this should be a SMART goal. So a SMART goal is one that is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So let's say your goal is that you want to save money. Well, we might turn that into a SMART goal by adding in some details. So we can take our goal of I want to save money and turn it into a SMART goal by saying I want to save $200 in an emergency fund every month for the next 12 months. This goal is now specific, it's measurable, it's achievable for this person, right? It's relevant and it's timely. Turning a goal into a SMART goal gives you a clear, easy to follow roadmap to achieving your goal. It's now something that you can tangibly incorporate into your monthly budget and actually plan for. Whereas I want to save money, not so much. So first things first, right? Set your SMART goal. From there, find a tool that you like. So remember that your budget needs to be two things. It's got to be a plan for your money, so how you want to save and spend your money. And it's also got to be some sort of tool to help you keep track of your spending to help you achieve the plan that you set out for yourself. So ideally, you're looking for some sort of tool that can kind of help you manage both of these things. There are a ton of tools, apps, and websites out there that can help you with your budget. Some are paid, but there are also some free options out there. For beginners to budgeting, I will say I recommend using an Excel sheet because you have to be super intentional and go in and track your own spending weekly. And tracking your spending can be a really eye-opening habit. There are some budgeting apps that can connect to your accounts and track your spending for you. But if you haven't already built a good budgeting habit, that kind of forces you to take some time and actually look at what you're spending, it might be tough to implement a good habit when you start with an app. You may be tracking your spending, but kind of missing that piece of adjusting your habits. So I recommend the budgeting sheet on our website. Nick just posted a link in the chat to where you can find that. It is a comprehensive tool that allows you to both kind of create your spending plan and also track your spending to help you achieve your plan. If you are looking for an app, some apps that some of us use in the center and have heard good things about include You Need a Budget, Good Budget, Zeta, or Pocket Guard. You Need a Budget, or YNAB, is a paid app, but you're able to get 1 year free as a student if you use your Penn State email to sign up. So if you do use a budgeting app, be sure to set that time aside to pull it up and look at your spending, maybe recategorize expenses if you need to, at least once a week so that you're able to use that information to change your spending habits. So I've got another quick poll for you. I want to encourage you to think about what sort of tool you would use for your budget, or maybe you already use for your budget. All right, launching that out now. So think about which budgeting tool already works best for you or might work best for you, and which of these would you be willing to try? And oh, I'm sorry, I see that I did not update this poll. We still have Mint in here. Mint is no longer in existence. Folks who used Mint previously are really upset about that. But there are other apps that track your spending. Mint was probably like the most comprehensive app that was also free. But I'm loving to see that a lot of us are interested in our Excel template, like the one from the center. I definitely encourage you to download that and play around with it. Mint. I know, Lance. I love that too, a handwritten budget. It's really about what works for you, right? Some people love to keep it simple with like the pen and paper method. All right. Moving on here, I'm glad to see you guys are thinking about your budgets. You're thinking about what plans and tools are going to work best for you. Continuing on, we're on step 3. We've got our SMART goal. We've got our budgeting tool ready to go, right? Now we're going to use that tool to help us identify our income and our expenses. I said this earlier, but we really should be building our budgets based off of our net income because this is the money that's actually landing in our bank accounts that we get to use. If you have trouble remembering the difference between gross income and net income, here's a little rhyme that might help. Gross is the most and net is what you get. So from there, you'll track your expenses. You want to think about how you pay for items here. Do you use your debit card? Do you use your credit card? Or are you a cash person? Or maybe you use a mix of all three. Remember that our budgets have to be honest, accurate, and complete, so we can't let any of our spending slip through the cracks. I'm guilty of, if I get cash, not including that in my budget because that's not my primary spending method. But I've gotten better about that. I try and just make a note on my phone of, oh, I spent this in cash. Remember this when you're doing your budget, right? So for debit or credit card spending, it's probably pretty easy to track your spending. You could just pull up your bank account and look through those transactions. For cash, again, it's a little bit more tricky. You could keep receipts or you could use the Notes app like I do and just keep track when you spend in cash. And of course, you've got to remember to pull that back up when you're doing your budget then. So I just want to give a quick example of what budgeting and this piece of identifying income and expenses and tracking your spending and having this all going on. I want to give an example of kind of what this looks like for me. It might help you envision how a budgeting habit could fit into your life. So personally, I am an Excel girly. So my entire budget is on an Excel sheet. I do use the one from the center. I think it's really great. So once a week, usually on Sundays, I bust out my Excel sheet over a cup of coffee and I pull up my bank account and my credit card because those are the things that I do my spending on. I update my budget sheet with all the spending that I've done in the last week, and then I take a moment to look it all over and determine if I'm on track with the goals that I've set for myself or those spending limits, or not. So, for example, if it's the second week of the month and I'm over halfway through my monthly food budget, I'll realize in that moment that I need to make a change there and cut back a bit on the weeks ahead to stay on track with my overall budget. If you use a budgeting app, again, it might track your spending for you, but remember that you've got to make that time to potentially recategorize your expenses and then look it over and really digest the information that it's giving you. So no matter if you've got an Excel sheet or an app, I recommend updating your budget once a week. Once a week really seems to be the sweet spot. I talk to a lot of students and even adults about their budgets. And it seems like if we put this pressure on ourselves to track our spending more than once a week, we begin to resent it. No one wants to feel like they need to whip out their Excel budget every time they swipe their card, right? And then on the other hand, if you resort to maybe tracking your spending once a month, that doesn't give you this opportunity to really be proactive with your choices. So we want to be proactive with our budgets rather than reactive, right? And so if you track your spending once a month and you see like, oh, shoot, I didn't hit my financial goals again. Like, what am I doing wrong? You're just not giving yourself that time that you need to actually be able to make those choices and change your decisions. So based on my experience, once a week really seems to be that sweet spot. And I would encourage you to think about some other habit that you maybe do once a week and try and habit stack your budget. So maybe you do laundry once a week and maybe you throw in your first load of laundry and just pull up your budget then and get her done. You also can and should categorize your expenses into different groups throughout this process. Different budgeting categories that you might consider are on the screen here. So we've got food, housing, subscriptions, entertainment, personal, transportation, debt, gifts, savings, and clothing. You can also tailor these to your own needs if there's something that is important to you that you want to be a budget category, maybe like a pet, could totally add that in. Within your categories, you might even split up your expenses into needs and wants. This could be especially helpful if you decide to use the 50-30-20 budget, because that kind of requires you to do that, right? So on this example, groceries are definitely a need, right? We need to eat. And for this person, Starbucks was also a need, but Jamba Juice and Raising Cane's was a want. And if we need to cut our expenses to stay within budget, we're going to have to cut from wants. So it's important to know which is which for you within your budget. And this is going to look different for all of us. It's also a great idea to budget monthly for quarterly and annual expenses. For example, my sewer bill is $180 and it gets billed every 3 months. So I set aside $60 a month for that expense. And this is helpful to keep an even keel and not have my budget take a bigger hit every time the sewer bill comes out in those 3 months. So your budget is really supposed to serve you in achieving financial wellness, right? Remember our ladder. Remember that our budgets are the base of our financial wellness ladders. So really quick, I'm going to drop a depressing statistic. The Fed's 2022 economic well-being study found that 37% of Americans couldn't cover a hypothetical $400 emergency expense. You might have heard this statistic before. And Nick just dropped a link in the chat to that full article if you want to read more into that study. But when these types of emergencies come up and folks are without the money to cover those emergencies, it probably looks like swiping a credit card and going into credit card debt, right? So This just goes to show how important saving is. We've got to make room in our budgets for saving, and we've got to remember to pay ourselves first, right? Saving to create an emergency fund and also saving to prepare for your periodic expenses can help prevent going into debt. Ideally, your emergency fund should be at least 3 months of your expenses, not necessarily 3 months of your income, but 3 months of your expenses. So if you were to no longer have an income, what are the things that you would still need to pay for? So maybe a rent or mortgage payment, utilities, a food budget, loan payments, that kind of thing. At least 3 months of that. So when you've got an emergency fund, when emergencies inevitably arise, they are no longer financial emergencies. Having an emergency fund lessens the emergency kind of by one level. You can just dip into that emergency fund, take care of the thing, and move on, right? It's a much less stressful experience when you've prepared for the unexpected. So we have this bucket on the screen, and your savings account might end up looking something like this bucket. You've got your emergency fund in there. You've got some money allocated for your short-term goals and your periodic expenses that you might have coming up, like insurance, taxes, car registration, and gift shopping. You want to be sure that your savings account is safe and accessible to you in something like an FDIC insured savings account or a high yield savings account. High yield savings accounts right now are paying between 4 to 5% interest, so they are really great financial accounts to have. Compared to my traditional savings account, gets 0.01% interest. And my high yield savings account, I think, is 4.5%. So big difference there. This is a great question. Do you recommend having an emergency fund separate from your savings? I think it's going to depend on what makes the most sense for you. I'm someone who likes to have like these different buckets of money. So while we're looking at on the screen here, this entire bucket is someone's savings account. For me, I've got a separate bucket with my periodic expenses. I've got a separate bucket for my emergency fund. And different buckets for different things. But some people are okay with just kind of smushing it all together. The only thing I would say there is you want to kind of take note of maybe like what is for what, right? Like what's for these periodic expenses? What's your emergency fund? What's for your short-term goals? That kind of thing. When you live paycheck to paycheck, how do you get the savings started? That's a great question. So my best answer is to start small. Start small, save what you can. I will say pay yourself first, but also don't go overboard. If 10%, for example, doesn't work in your budget, you can't save 10%, then maybe start with 5% or even 2%. Another really great tip for folks who work full time is when you get annual raises, just commit to saving those instead of spending those. It's probably not much, right? But that can just start to get the ball rolling, right? Just commit to saving that little extra that you get. Great question. I do believe we have a link also for high yield savings accounts. I'm not sure if that perfect. Thank you, Nick. So if you're interested in learning more about high yield savings accounts or maybe interested in getting one, check out that resource. It is a great one. Okay, moving on. The next step is to subtract your income from your expenses. And in this example, this person has their paycheck, some birthday money, and maybe $5 that they found on the sidewalk. Remember, your budget has got to be accurate, honest, and complete, so we should include all sources of income. And we see their expenses here as well. They've subtracted their expenses from their income, so they have a surplus of $23.53. Woo, that is good news, right? As we saw in Alex's example, credit cards do make it possible to spend more money than you have and end up with a shortage. So a surplus is always a great thing to see. If you have a surplus, congrats. Here are some things that you might consider. Maybe first, establishing your 3 months worth of expenses in your emergency fund. If you have debts, you might consider paying those down, prioritizing any high interest debt that you have first, like maybe credit cards or high interest student loans, or beginning to invest for retirement through something like a Roth IRA. At this point, you could also consider any other financial goals that you have. Maybe that looks like saving up for a car or a trip. You just want to make sure if you've got a surplus, you're putting that money to good use, right? If you've got a shortage, that is way less exciting. Here are some things that you might think about to address this shortage. I think the first thing we tend to think about when we feel like we need more money is, or we feel like we're short on money, is increasing our income. But it actually might be a bit easier to cut out unnecessary spending first. So you'll just want to look back over your spending and decide which things were wants that you probably shouldn't have purchased in that moment and commit to changing your spending habits and behavior in the future. You could also find ways to spend less. You might have to get a little creative and crafty here, but some examples are using a grocery store app to find deals and get cash back, maybe getting a roommate, potentially moving to a lower cost of living area if that is an option, or utilizing local food banks to kind of supplement your food budget. Lastly, you could think of ways to earn more money. If you're a student and you don't have a job, maybe that looks like getting an on-campus job. That might look like selling some things online, getting a second job, or working overtime, that kind of thing. We saw Alex's budget earlier, and we know that he had a shortage. Can anyone remember Alex's budget? And if so, do you have any ideas on what he might do to address his shortage? If so, I'd love to see your ideas in the chat. Less dining out. That's a good one. Dining out really is expensive. Find a roommate. Cut the eating out and clothing. Yeah, maybe he starts to thrift instead of buying $100 worth of clothes. I love this idea from Cheryl. Trim his dining out way back and use grandma's $25 for that. I think that's a great idea. That's a great way to, not deprive yourself and say, like, I'm never going to be able to do this again. But cut back and do it in a more realistic way for your current situation. These are all great ideas. I think what I want to highlight here when it comes to having a shortage is, if we think about this in the simplest of terms, there are really only two solutions for having a budget shortage. The first is to cut expenses, and the second is to make more money, right? Earn a higher income. Personally, I think it is maybe easier to actually cut expenses first before you resort to spending more time and energy working a second job or working more, that kind of thing. All right, so this was a lot of information. Here's a quick kind of recap of the budgeting process. Remember, if you don't have a budget currently, start with setting your SMART financial goal and finding your budget tool and kind of going from there. Again, the most important step here is adjusting your spending as needed. If you go through all of these other steps and miss that last piece, your budget isn't really working for you, right? The most important thing is that you're able to use the information that you gather from the budgeting process and use that to change your spending habits and adjust those behaviors. So as we wrap up today's webinar, just know that we are here to help. We help a lot of students build and create their budgets. All of our services are free and available to Penn State students, and some of our services are available to staff and faculty as well. We do offer one-on-one financial coaching appointments. Students can schedule those in Starfish. We offer those appointments to alumni as well. Alumni who are interested can email us at finlit@psu.edu to schedule an appointment. And we work with our partners at PNC to offer one-on-one financial coaching to Penn State faculty and staff. We unfortunately don't have the capacity to meet with faculty and staff as well. So if you want to email us, if you are a faculty and staff, we can get you connected with PNC. Group presentations and webinars can be scheduled for classes, student organizations, and groups. If you think our resources and our information and education could be helpful to a group that you lead. We have self-study modules on a variety of different topics. Those are in Canvas. They are open to the public. A self-study module is a great step if you want to learn more about financial literacy, but you're not quite ready to talk with someone one-on-one. Our mentoring program provides a space for current students to connect with an alumni or someone in the Penn State community to receive guidance on financial and life skills. And then lastly, our newest offering is our workshops program. And these workshops really provide a space to get hands-on with your finances. So that is all we had for you today. Thank you so much for attending our first webinar of the semester. I hope you are really feeling motivated and fired up to create or even improve upon your own budget.